We've been thinking about slavery because slavery is a real institution. It's a real practice that human beings experienced in the ancient world, where we can see the intersection of theories about law and justice with the realities of life, of status, of equality and inequality, of rights and dignity. Let's turn just momentarily from slavery to another kind of practical experience, to another real practice or institution of the ancient world that allows us to reflect on the meaning and limits of justice in this world. And that's the practice of child exposure. We give the name of child exposure to what was an almost unimaginably common experience in the ancient world. The ancient world is an agricultural world that lives on the edges of subsistence. This is not a world of great prosperity for the masses of people. And it's a world with very limited technologies of reproduction. This is a world before birth control. And in that context, the ancient Greeks and Romans practiced child exposure. Child exposure, brutally, is a way of taking a live birth and exposing it in a wild place or on a trash heap. In other words, putting an infant that's been born out to die. And this is, for the ancient Greeks and the Romans, a way of limiting family size. It's a way of disposing of disabled children. It's a way of limiting the size of the population as a whole. For the rich, it's a way of maintaining a small number of heirs. For the poor, it's a way of maintaining a family size that can be fed on the family farm. But for all different reasons that it's practiced, we know that it's actually very common in the ancient world. It's perfectly acceptable. It's part of the myths of the ancient world. Think of Romulus and Remus. They are the founders of the city of Rome. They are illegitimate, and so their mother exposes them as babies to try and rid herself of them. We have extraordinary documents across the Roman world that verify that this was a common practice. We know that some children were in fact collected by slave traders and were raised up until they were small children and could be sold off for slaves. We know that most of the time, children in these circumstances must have perished. We have an extraordinary papyrus fragment that preserves a letter in the early 1st century from a husband to his wife. He's traveling, she's pregnant, and he just says at the end of a letter, a business letter, oh, and by the way, if the child that's born is a boy, keep it. If it's a girl, go ahead and expose it. And so there was probably a strong gender component to decisions to expose children. So this almost unimaginably, to our mind, horrific crime is not only allowed, but is in fact quite common in the ancient world. Think of this as a kind of practice that has to ultimately intersect with concepts of law and justice. It's permitted, but is it just? In the Republic of Plato, even in his ideal society, there is child exposure. And in fact, he says that children who are of kind of low quality should be, in fact, exposed. In Aristotle's Politics, although he says that child exposure is unholy, that it's not right, it nevertheless must be practiced sometimes, that in some cases it's just. And it would seem that this would be, in fact, in cases of disability or in which the child is considered by the society of low quality. In the very earliest form of Roman law, the 12 Tables, it says, a deformed child shall be immediately killed. So there exists in the ancient world justifications, rationalizations of child exposure. But as you read, now not just in the Christian, but also in the Jewish philosophers of the ancient world, you will encounter criticisms of this practice. The Jewish philosopher Philo, an extraordinary thinker who lives in the great Egyptian city of Alexandria, roughly the same age of Jesus and Paul, writes in the tradition of Plato's philosophy, but combines it with Judaism, combines it with the law of Moses. Philo's writings survive in some abundance and provide us insights to this remarkable thinker who combines Platonism and Judaism. And in fact, Philo will turn to practices of the society around him, and he's surrounded by a Greek society in Alexandria, and offer critical remarks on it. And he fundamentally believes that child exposure is a crime, that it violates the basic dignity of children who are creations of God, who have a kind of breath or spirit that entitles them to the right to live. So we see also throughout early Christian authors, even more so in some ways than slavery, are critical in the earliest centuries of those who would expose children for any reason, under any circumstance. And whereas slavery would never generate political or legal change of a fundamental nature in the ancient world, in fact, child exposure would. During the reign of the Emperor Justinian, who is one of the most overtly Christian of the late Roman legislators, late Roman lawmakers, child exposure is considered a crime. It's equated with murder, and in fact, it is severely punished. And so here we do see an institutional change driven by a different idea of what rights an individual has, what kind of entitlements they have, what kind of dignity they have, that is a fundamental change from the ancient to the Christian world that is instantiated in a new set of laws.